Good evening, it's 6 o'clock, and welcome to the July 5th meeting of the governing body. We will start with an invocation. If you'll give your attention to Councilman Emerson. Stand as you are able, then remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. Father in heaven, I want to thank you for the blessing of living in a country where we're free to express our opinions, where we're free to pursue our dreams, and where we're free to worship. Father, so many men and women, we just celebrated Independence Day, as you know, and so many men and women of our country over the years have sacrificed, Father, their blood and their very lives for this freedom. And Father, we thank you so much for them. Father, please give us wisdom tonight as we discuss the issues that affect our citizens, Father, and our city. Father, we're so limited compared to your knowledge, and so please give us that wisdom, Father. And Father, we're so thankful again to be in this country, and we just ask that you continue to bless the United States. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, this evening we do have a little bit of a different agenda schedule. We will proceed with the roll call, but immediately after the roll call, I'll ask the city attorney to read that we have a need for an executive session at the front end of the meeting as opposed to at the end. We will have one at the end as well, but if you will call the roll, please.
Mayor Padilla.
Here.
Councilmembers Hiller.
Here.
Valdivia Acala.
Here.
Ortiz.
Here.
Emerson.
Here.
Kale.
Here.
Nager. Dobler.
Here.
Duncan.
Here.
And Lesser. Looks like we have 8 present.
Okay, thank you. City attorney.
The motion would be to recess into executive session not to exceed 20 minutes to discuss matters related to an individual company regarding a possible economic development issue, which will involve the discussion of confidential financial affairs of the company pursuant to KSA 754319B4. The open meeting will resume in the City Council chambers. We ask that anyone not included in the executive session please exit the chambers upon conclusion of this motion. The following staff may be needed to assist the governing body in its deliberations: Interim City Manager Cochran, Planning Director Fyander, Utilities Director and Public Works Director Broxton Copley, and City Attorney Stanley, as well as Finance Director Stephen Wood.
Okay, you've heard the need for executive session. The chair would entertain a motion to approve by Councilman Dobler and seconded by Councilwoman Hiller. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say no. Okay, we will adjourn into executive session if you'll bear with us. Okay, we are now coming out of executive session. Going on with the agenda, no action has been taken during the executive session. The city clerk would read agenda item number 3, please.
3 is the board appointment recommending the reappointment of Beverly Hall to the Topeka Metropolitan Transit Authority for a term ending July 1, 2026.
That's the only appointment we have. Is there a recommendation from the body?
I'll move
Motion to approve from Councilwoman Hiller.
Second.
Second from Councilman Dobler. If you'll take the roll vote, please.
Council members Valdivia Acala.
Yes, and I'm having a really hard time hearing you.
Okay. Council members Ortiz.
Yes, and we are having a very hard time of hearing you.
Council members Emerson.
Yes, and I can hear you fine, by the way.
Kale.
Yes.
Dobler.
Yes.
Duncan.
Yes.
Lesser,
Yes.
Mayor Padilla,
Yes.
and Hiller.
Yes.
We have 9 yes, motion carries.
Okay, is Ms. Hall with us this evening? I didn't know whether or not she was going to be able to make it. Okay, she did not. Okay, well, thank you very much, and welcome to the appointment. We'll move on now to agenda item number 4, the consent agenda. If the clerk will read.
A is a resolution introduced by Councilmember Cristina Valdivia Acla granting Fiesta Mexicana an exception to the provisions of City of Topeka Code Section 945-150 at seat concerning noise prohibitions. B is approval of a Public Works engineering contract with Alfred Finish and Company to aid the city with providing design services in the amount of $189,730 for the reconstruction of Southeast Quincy Street from Southeast 10th to Southeast 8th Street. C are minutes of the regular meeting of June 21, 2022. There is a list of cereal malt beverage applications, and staff is recommending approval.
Okay, you've heard the consent agenda. Is there a motion from the body? A motion to approve by Councilman Kell. Second from Councilman Emerson. If you'll call the roll, please.
Councilmembers Ortiz,
Yes.
Emerson,
Yes.
Hale,
Yes.
Dobler,
Yes.
Duncan,
Yes.
Lesser,
Yes.
Mayor Padilla,
Yes.
Councilmembers Hiller,
Yes.
and Valdivia Acla.
Yes.
We have 9 yes, motion carries.
Okay, we'll move on to agenda item number 5, if the clerk will read.
A is a discussion regarding options to address capital needs and rate adjustments to sustain the downtown parking system.
City Manager.
At this point, Mayor and governing body, a lot of information has been shared with the governing body and all of that. We do have a presentation for the governing body, and at this time, I will turn it over to Ms. Hannah Ulrich, who has a presentation for the downtown parking.
Thank you, sir. Presenting with me tonight will be Jason Tryon, who is our Budget Analytics Manager for Public Works. So we will kind of tag team. I'll give a little bit of an introduction to what you're about to see. He'll help walk through the different models that we have ran for you, and then we'll stand for questions at the end. So as requested with the May 31st special meeting on parking, we have taken the time to run through several different iterations of options for the governing body to consider moving forward with the parking system. So we will cover a variety of different ones. We approach the models with some basic assumptions. The first being that we are wanting to model out what it would take for the parking fund to be self-sustaining from an operational perspective. So looking annually, what that would take, taking any applicable debt service that we currently have, as well as, capital expenditures that we would need to maintain the garages going forward. This first section with the general fund supplement assumes that the deferred maintenance that we've referred to over the past several meetings, the approximate $10 to $15 million, would be covered in another means, so not tasking the parking fund with supporting that liability. The second is what would happen if the debt service and the costs associated with carrying that were tasked by the parking fund to fund internally, meaning raising our own revenue, looking at how we could sustain that with the debt service fees that we would anticipate needing to pay out annually. The second model that covers this debt service has a number of assumptions that we have the Director of Finance, Mr. Wade, here to help if we have additional questions about what that modeling could be. But this is to provide a baseline for us as a means to help aid your discussion. We will also be looking at the Uptowner independent, as it's not currently part of our existing parking system today, meaning while the city owns it, we do not operationally control it, and it has not contributed to our revenue or our expense structure for nearly 20 plus years. So with the models Jason's about to go over with you, wanted to cover some high-level assumptions that are built into each of them. The first is that parking will continue to operate as an enterprise fund, meaning the revenue that we generate out of this fund is not going to be used to fulfill any other expenses for the city that are not directly related to parking. We have, all of the models are based on demand assumptions for garage utilization and lease percentages based on 2019 levels pre-COVID. Currently, we're sitting at about 90% of that demand level. It varies month to month slightly, but we are catching up with those levels pre-pandemic now that people are starting to return to the office more. We also have seen, as we have discussed many times in this chamber, a large inflation when it comes to construction costs. So we have assumed that some of the models that we were given or numbers that we were giving in both the Desmond study in 2017 as well as our garage assessments in 2020 have incurred an inflation rate of 30% as a baseline, and then an annual inflation for construction 5% every year going forward. As you will also see in the model, in addition to it is the repair fund. This repair fund is based on a recommendation from the Desmond study that we set aside a certain amount per stall every year to maintain the garages adequately. So with the assumption that the garages are up to speed, meaning the deferred maintenance and the deferred capital expenses are taken care of separate from this, it recommends garages at $130 per stall annually, and on-street and lots at $32.50 per stall annually. And this repair fund is explicitly called out in the models so that we can essentially demonstrate how we propose to keep the parking system from getting back into the situation that we're in today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jason.
All right, so the first scenario that we're looking at here is maintaining our current parking system without any reduction in assets, and what it would take from a rate perspective in order to make that fully self-sufficient over the next 10 years. I want to reiterate that any of the modeling that we've done, there were a lot of assumptions. Some of the biggest ones Ms. Jordan just covered, but there was over 200 variables that we considered as we were using this model. Obviously, we can't predict the future, but these are our best estimates because we have to make some assumptions in order to create a model that works going forward. Also, I want to reiterate as well that anything that we're presenting is not advocating for any particular method. This is just running the math of what would it take given the assumptions that we made in the previous discussion. So the first scenario you're looking at here is if we were setting aside the cost of the deferred maintenance repairs, we would be intending to produce a self-funded parking system. In order to do so, the model does start a process by which we would charge for Kansas Avenue parking, as well as on the blocks 1 block east and west of Kansas Avenue, which are currently those yellow hooded meters. This model shows that parking operations could be self-funded with a garage rate increase immediately of 16% and then a subsequent increase of 10% every 4 years after. So you can see in 2023, we are showing a garage rate of $79 compared to $67.75 today. The increase includes adding that $10.83 that is needed for that long-term repair fund that we just discussed. There are also additional increases in some other fees. The meter hoods that are currently charged either for off Kansas and on Kansas, the current rate for off Kansas hoods is $6 and on Kansas Avenue is $15. Those rates would increase to, if you see on the bottom, $30 for on Kansas Avenue and $15 for the other meters off Kansas Avenue. We also increased the cost of citations from $8 for a first citation to $10 and for a second citation to $20 from $15. As you're looking at the models, for every $1 increase in garage rates, the estimated revenue increase is approximately $20,000. So if you wanted to increase revenue by $500,000, you would need to raise the garage rates by approximately $25 per month. For a base point in 2023, the planned revenue is $2.5 million. That would cover operating expenses, but it does not cover capital needs. So we started with a revenue projection of $2.5 million, and then we had additional that was layered in after considering garage rate increases and charging on Kansas Avenue and those 100 blocks east and west of Kansas Avenue. The second scenario that you're looking at here would be using the same model as far as not covering the deferred maintenance out of parking funds. but with removing 2 garages, Townsite and Coronado, from the existing parking system. So what you're seeing here doesn't cover all the same information on the previous slide. It's intended to show what changes from the previous model into this model. So the question is, if we were to remove those 2 assets, what would happen? So this is one possible scenario. We considered several different scenarios with removing some combination of different parking assets. This is intended to be a representation of those different scenarios, but what we often found is that as we went through this process, we arrived at a similar conclusion each time that we considered different combinations of reductions of assets. One key assumption that was made in this model is that we did not assume that any proceeds from the sale of those assets would be available for reinvestment. For 2 reasons. One, we did not know what amount of net proceeds the city would receive for the sale of any assets. And 2, we did not want to assume that any net proceeds would be allocated to the parking fund. So if you look at the combined section, you can see that if those 2 assets were removed from the parking system, the decrease in revenue would be approximately $890,000, and there is a decrease of direct expense of $306,000, a decrease in the repair fund of $139,000, and indirect expenses of $10,000. So there's a total expense reduction annually of $455,000. So just to break that down a little bit further, when we talk about reducing the repair fund, obviously if we remove those assets from the system, that creates less of a need going forward to generate funds available for capital investment into the future. So that's why there's a reduction in the repair fund that would be needed. Also, when modeling, we looked carefully at direct and indirect expenses of the assets. Direct expenses are those that are eliminated with the removal of the asset. So for example, utilities. If we remove one of the garages from our current operating system, the water bill at that garage is gone. We don't have to pay it anymore. Every dollar of expense in that direct category is removed from the system. Indirect expenses, or what some people commonly refer to as overhead, are items such as software, administrative fees, and employee expense. Indirect expenses can be reduced as more and more assets are removed from the system. However, they can't be eliminated entirely unless we were to remove all of the parking assets, including on-street parking. So on average, the expenses for any given asset are roughly 35% direct and 65% indirect. So after the removal of these 2 garages, that would leave a deficit of $427,000, which you can see on the bottom there in the first year in 2023. In order to make up for that loss of revenue after the reduction in expenses, we would have to increase garage rates to a rate of $104 per month in order to maintain revenue neutrality. So reiterating, for each dollar that you increase garage rates, it's estimated revenue of $20,000 per month. So the last scenario that we have in this kind of group of scenarios would be if all of our off-street parking assets were eliminated. And in this scenario, the only assets that we would maintain would be the on-street metered assets and time spaces and the parking lots that are currently serviced by the parking system. So this particular model could be self-funded with an enterprise fund. It would include some rate increases both to our on-street assets and to our parking lots, and it would also include charging for Kansas Avenue and those blocks east and west, the first block east and west of Kansas Avenue. This was just intended to show what would the increase be if we removed all of the garage assets and obviously all of the capital expense and need for a repair fund for those assets going forward. The next scenario that you're going to see there is if all of the capital assets that we have called out in our previous meetings were funded using revenue bonds, that the parking fund would be responsible for paying that debt service going forward. So the cost of that debt service would have to be included into the annual budget going forward. In order to support that debt service and to catch up on those deferred capital repairs, parking rates would have to increase by 68% in 2023 and then have additional increases every 4 years of 10% going forward. Obviously, $15 million of debt expenses going forward would require $970,000 increase in garage rates in order to cover that debt. We also, in this section, wanted to look at a similar question like we did on the previous set of assumptions of if we were to remove the town side and Coronado garages for the system. Again, this is just to represent an example of removing assets. It's not recommending by any means removing those two assets. This is just a representation of various scenarios of reducing assets. Similar to the earlier model, if we remove Townside and Coronado from the system, we would have to increase the revenue in the other assets to a garage rate of $148 monthly in order to maintain revenue neutrality. And that does include the reduction of debt service from $970,000 to $438,000. So we would have significantly less debt service going forward. We would have less need for the operating repair fund going forward. However, by removing those assets, the reduction in revenue would necessitate an increase in the rates of the remaining balance of assets. So just a summary of the different rate increases that we discussed on the previous slides. This is a high-level recap we just reviewed. It does assume the current parking system, implementation of paid parking on Kansas Avenue and the 100 block east and west in Kansas Avenue. Depending on the different scenario, you can see all the different rates that would need to be charged in order to maintain that revenue neutrality. Our current of $67.75 in the garages, and then you can also see the cost for Kansas Avenue, which today is $0, and the first citation of $8. If the deferred maintenance was supplemented with general fund dollars or bonds that were paid for out of the general fund, the rate increase would necessitate $79 or $1.25 for Kansas Avenue, with a first citation being $10. If that debt service is entirely paid for by the parking fund, that number goes up to $114. And then we plan additional increases in 2027 and 2032 using that 10% increase every 4 years, as was recommended in the Desmond parking study. So just to recap, it is possible to remove garages from the existing parking system, but if that does happen, there would be a need to increase revenue and to supplement the cost of reducing the revenue from those garages that were gone. In order to offset that, we would have to increase rates by approximately 53% on the remaining system in order to make up for that loss of revenue. Just a brief discussion of the Uptowner garage. It is not currently part of our overall parking system. It is owned by the city, but is not currently operated by the city. We wanted to include some assumptions so you could see what revenue would look like. We used the Coronado garage, which is the closest in current size and revenue that we could use as an estimate for what the Uptowner garage would bring in if we were to assume that and include it into our operating model. Holding the same rated garage rate as the previous model, the Uptowner could be self-sustaining, but based on the additional capital costs that it would that we are estimating or that was recommended by the engineering study, the break-even under this operating model would be approximately 37 years in order to cover the cost of that deferred maintenance that would need to be done on that garage. And also we did include an estimated cost of demolition. That number is not a recommendation. It's just there to understand what that cost would be if that's the direction moving forward. So obviously a lot of information was just covered. We would stand for questions on any of the revenue models or any of the approaches and assumptions that were made to produce those models.
Thank you for the information. Entertain some questions from the governing body. Councilwoman Hiller.
Just a quick one for starters anyway, and that is a refresher on the presentation that we had before, that the Desmond study and then this one, I think, estimated that if our plans for full occupancy of downtown came to fruition, and we are on our way toward that, we'd need all the garages that we have to get us to that point, and if we really are 100% full, we might need more, but we're good for a while with the system.
That was what was stated in the Desmond study that was conducted in 2017. They were using some assumptions based on ongoing development that would take place downtown.
Correct. Which we are too, right? Okay, just wanted to frame this with that. Thank you.
Further questions from the body? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Got a couple. These are in no particular order. So, what are we going to do with the oops tickets, which you know I hate and find completely absurd? Because I've traveled the last year since COVID lifted, and I guarantee you I have not been to a single downtown where the fact that I was from out of town, they gave two you-know-whats about. They would have given me a ticket in a heartbeat. So I'm curious, does this include the elimination of oops tickets or continuing to give oops tickets?
So just to clarify, by oops tickets, you mean the longstanding practice of issuing a warning to an out-of-county or out-of-state resident for a first offense.
Correct.
So this model does not include any assumptions based on that. That is a practice that predates my time in parking. I can tell you we do write slightly more oops tickets today than we did 2 years ago, most likely due to the fact that we now have a hotel that is located right downtown within our operating footprint. Approximately 17% of the tickets that we write qualify under that oops ticket. So one thing that I do reiterate every chance I get, parking citations are less than 7% of revenue. They are not a significant source of revenue for the parking fund. If we eliminated that practice, I estimate we would bring in an additional approximately $30,000 to $35,000 a year. We did not include that in the model, but if that's the will of the governing body, we're certainly willing to discontinue that practice.
My will, I don't know about everyone else. And mainly it's less about the revenue for me, about ticketing people already paying taxes into the road they're using and not ticketing the people who are, but that's fine. So, okay, that's helpful, I appreciate that. If we put up all the money to do the repairs for these garages and those repairs commence, have we looked at what the impact of that is then to the long-term maintenance budget? I mean, in theory, would it maybe reduce the maintenance budget or at least have some impact on that in the long term if we've taken a lot of those issues up front off of the garages?
Yes, sir. So that was where the $130 per garage stall and the $33 essentially per on-street and surface lot numbers came from, was with the assumption that the large deferred maintenance items would be caught up, and that would allow us enough flexibility going forward to ensure that we can adequately maintain them. So proper sealing on a cycle, any issues we have with concrete, all of those sort of things would be included in the ongoing practice.
How do we decide what hour timed meters go where? I mean, for instance, on one side of Van Buren, there's 2 or 1 hour meters. On the other side, there's 10-hour meters.
To be honest, sir, that is a practice that has predated Jason or I. It is in our plans to go forward to simplify a lot of our zones. However, there is a risk associated with our meters currently because you have to retool them, and they are very old, and we have a limited supply. But that is in our original proposal, was to remove a lot of the different time zones and definitely simplify it for our downtown customers.
I think the 10-hour ones always blow my mind. That's fine. But, and then my last question, I think, is, so what would the meters on, what would it be on Kansas Avenue? What is the specific proposal as to what it would cost? I mean, I see the cost, $1, but I didn't see the time, and maybe I just missed that. I apologize. 1 hour, 2 hour, what would it be?
We have not currently had a defined time that we are proposing. Pre-COVID, when we were discussing this with the downtown stakeholders and governing body, the general assumption was 2 hours, as that's what we have on the 100 blocks for consistency purpose. But there was at that time some debate about whether or not 2 or 4 was going to be more appropriate given the mixed use, but it had not been solidified in the current round of discussions.
I did have one more question, and now I forgot. Thank you.
It'll come to you.
It will.
Councilman Dobler, and then Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. Good presentation. Just a couple of questions. Tell me again how you determine the capital needs for the parking garages.
So the estimates that are currently used here are a combination of 2 different studies and then some assumptions. So in 2020, there was a study that was done on 4 of the parking garages, and a complete engineering assessment was done. And at the time, they made recommendations on the cost and need of repairs at each of those garages. We had an additional study that was performed by an engineering firm on the Uptowner garage, specific to that garage, which was done more recently. So we chose not to apply as high of an inflation rate on those estimates as those were done in the last year. The estimates that were given to us in 2020 is where we applied that 30% increase, knowing what we know has happened in the last 2 years to construction costs. 3 of the 8 garages, a study was not performed, but we were able to make what we consider to be some pretty safe assumptions without paying for additional studies. Based on the size, age, and configuration of the garages, for example, things like traffic coding or cost per square foot, we can assume with a pretty high degree of certainty, based on the previous estimates that we got on the existing garages based on those studies, what similar garages would cost in terms of maintenance. Excuse me.
Okay, so the 2 newest garages, I think, are Crosby Place and Center City?
That's correct.
Did
The
those
study
have-
was performed on Center City. It was not
Okay.
performed on Crosby.
And then the on-street parking capital cost, is that for meters or kiosk or something on Kansas Avenue?
That's correct. As of right now, we do not have a physical pay option in place for Kansas Avenue. So in order to implement paid parking, if that is something that the governing body wishes to do, we could take app-based payment. However, we did include an estimate on what it would cost to offer a physical pay station so that people would have the option to pay in person if they're not downloading an app.
One more question, if I could, Mayor. Where are the costs for converting the rest of the meters?
That is not currently included. So there is no cost estimate today for converting the existing meters to a smart meter platform. That is something that could be pursued in the future. I can tell you, we don't intend to do a lot of meter replacement. I think in the future, we would like to test out some different options for how people can pay without having a physical meter at the location. Some pay by app only zones, for example. But that is not something that was included. Previous studies have shown if you're buying an individual parking meter, it's the cost of replacing all those meters doesn't pay for themselves over a reasonable time frame. So keep the dumb meter as long as you can and try to convert as many people as possible to paying by app. Or using a pay station that could cover several parking meters without having a physical pay station at each individual parking space.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilman?
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Tryon, yeah, thanks for your work on this and for your presentation. I don't know if you could put slide number 5 back up from your presentation. And I apologize, the time we spent the other day on the phone was helpful, but I didn't have these in front of me. But I had a question. Now, you say rates would need to increase year 1 on this one by 63%. Is that to achieve these, we're still a loss even if we go by 63%? Is that?
So the first scenario that you saw was achieving revenue neutrality going forward. So having enough to cover operating expenses, current debt, and then also a funded repair program that going forward we wouldn't find ourselves in a scenario like we're in now, but that as capital repairs are needed, funds have been set aside along the way that can cover those costs. So we started from that. From there, we started working through other scenarios and saying, based on, in this scenario, the reduction of an asset reduced the revenue, and then it also reduced the expense. The net, which you're seeing at the bottom of each year there, is the difference in this model from the first model, which was revenue neutrality over a period of time. So we are expressing that gain and loss of saying, given this scenario, in year 1, we've lost $427,000 from the additional model that we identified as revenue neutral going forward. In the second year, it's $443,000. The assumptions going forward are based on the fact that rates are changing, but also expenses are changing because we did assume inflation on our expenses going forward. That rate adjustment is what would the rest of the parking system have to charge in order to make up for the fact that, for example, in this scenario, we've lost 817 revenue-producing spaces at Townsite and 255, I believe, revenue-producing spaces at the Coronado Garage. You take 1,000 spaces out of your inventory, the remaining inventory has to increase its productivity in order to offset that reduction.
Okay, thank you for that. But I guess my question is, does this already have a 63% increase and it's still a $427,000 deficit? Or would increasing it by 63% get us to neutral?
The second part. The 63% increase would correct that gain loss.
Okay.
I say correct. Correct is implies positive connotation. A 63% increase I would not intend to say is a positive thing.
So I guess my question then is, so if we sell 2 garages, and by the way, and right now, as you said, you're not planning on, you're basically thinking we'll get 0. I mean, that, you haven't put any, that we'll get any revenue out of
That was
selling
the
them.
assumption used, yes.
So if we increase rates by 63% and get rid of those 2 garages, we'd be neutral, but under keeping all of them and bonding it, we'd have to raise rates by 68%.
Correct,
then
to cover the
10% every
cost of that
4
debt
years.
service, yes.
Okay, so so it'd be more expensive to do the bonding and to fix them up than to get rid of 2. You'd need less of a rate increase to get to neutral.
From a monthly rate perspective,
Yeah.
yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
And I think the finance manager, or excuse me, the finance director would tell us, you're assuming that money, that the non-bonded scenario, that money still has to be paid for by someone.
The non-bonded.
In the non-bonded scenario, that money still has to be paid either through bonds that would be paid out of the general fund or through a one-time cash infusion.
Okay,
I think the clarification that needs to be made is the model assumption underlying slide 4 and 5 is that there would be a general fund infusion to pay the total capital costs. On slide 4, it's $15 million. On slide 5, it is approximately $6 million. But that's, both of those models are predicated on an outside infusion not being funded by
okay.
the enterprise fund, okay?
Okay,
Does that help?
yeah, thank you, that does, yes, thank you.
Councilman Dolan?
So on slide 7, you show the total capital needs, roughly $15 million. Does not include the Uptowner. If we add the Uptowner, that's $4.5 million, correct?
That's correct.
So we're looking at $20 million. Does that come all at once, or is that over a period? I mean, what would be the goal? To fix them all up at once, or?
It would be over approximately 10 years. It would, a large portion of that money would be up front, because a lot of the repairs, we would intend to do the repairs today. However, there are certain things that are built into that model, things like something you do in year 1, there's additional maintenance costs to maintain that in year 6.
And for additional clarification, when we did the study in 2020, where we did the condition assessments, that model assumed we started capital improvements in 2021. So when we revamped it, as this governing body is aware, we have not done any of those capital items. And the intention on that one had 65 to 70% of the identified capital needs falling within the first 4 years, based on current condition and how they could see us realistically flowing in those repairs. So while it is over a 10-year period, collectively, there is an assumption that a large percentage, closer to probably today, 75%, would need to be done within the next several years, essentially as fast as we could manage it within our existing system.
So you're talking about bonding $5 million year 1, $3 or $4 million year 2, and something like that until we get.
I think that's a reasonable
sir.
assumption.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor.
Deputy Mayor?
Remembered one of my questions. Have we looked or talked with any of the current largest users of those garages? Because I know this is based on pre-COVID, and gotten any sort of consideration of whether pre-COVID, post-COVID is going to look like pre-COVID. I mean, for example, while my wife's company is small, 20 people, they realized 2 people could work from home, and they now buy 10% less spaces than they did, and that's just a little 20-person outfit. I mean, have we had any survey or conversations with some of the bigger users to see if they're going to actually come back to pre-COVID levels?
We've had very many informal conversations with those users. Like we said, about 90% of our revenue has returned. So the lowest that it got to is about 30, on a monthly basis, about 35 to 40%. So our lowest revenue point was the winter of 2020 going into the spring of 2021. Since then, we've been on a fairly steady increase. Some of our smaller users have significantly reduced, but then over time, we've picked up new customers in other areas. We are seeing more residents downtown, which has offset some of the reduction in employees. And a lot of our employers, while they may be doing a partial return to work, they still have to maintain a parking space, because even if you're only in the office 1 or 2 days a week, you still need a place to park on that day.
And then my last question is, let's step outside the box a little bit. Have we looked at getting rid of all meters and going to a completely contactless system, whether that's pay stations at corners plus everything via an app, thereby eliminating the whole meter maintenance issue in general? I mean, have we even talked about, considered, kicked around that kind of system and what chaos it might bring up front, but maybe the long term? I mean,
It has been discussed. We have not put pen to paper on the actual dollar savings, if any, that scenario would produce. Obviously, there is a generational gap between the amount of people who carry cash and the amount of people who carry a smartphone. As of today, we're still servicing both of those customers. Over time, that may change, and the needs of our customers may change.
I'd here to see what the meter budget is, just to have a general idea.
I
My
can't-
own edification.
I can tell you that roughly 24% of our on-street customers pay using the app. So that number has gone up since we rolled it out, but we've plateaued at about 25% of the money that we bring in any given month for meters comes by app-based payment versus physical coin.
Thank you.
Further questions? Councilwoman Hiller?
Thank you, Mayor. Well, back to the specifics of this, thank you so much. I think you did a wonderful job in analysis and bringing forward what we had before. It's still a little dizzying, I think, but just to bring forward, I did a little bit of question and answer before this evening. This cost of the bonding is based on 30-year borrowing, which we have knocked back in terms of the borrowing we're doing for the most part to generally 15 years. You indicated that if we went to 20 years and went to non-taxable bonds, it would be different.
It would be a little less expensive if we went to 20-year non-taxable. The reason why the 30 taxable in this scenario was not knowing where the governing body was going as far as maintaining ownership of the garages. If we go non-taxable, we have basically committed ourselves to maintaining ownership.
But flipping that statement, if we make the decision that we're going to hang on to all the garages, we can get less expensive financing.
There are other options, yes, ma'am.
Thank you. And we could also then split it, for instance, if we felt like we wanted to put 10 million in cash into it and then borrow the rest of it. Obviously, the numbers would run in terms of adjusting what the rates would need to be. I'm pleased to see that what you've held in here as rates, both for the on-street parking as well as for the garages, are lower than what Desmond was anticipating, even in the first couple of years, if I recall, but certainly by now. So, not that I want them to go up, I really appreciate the squeeze on it, but we could run some scenarios where we split it, is that right?
We can. And our current bonds on City Center and
Crosby Place.
Crosby Place are 15-year bonds.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think people know it, but having been involved in the downtown planning as well as the parking planning, we do have a collection of garages, and I'll include the Uptowner in that for the time being, that location-wise, when we had the downtown planning and began this whole process of revitalizing downtown, the planners, we said what we want is a downtown that's going 24/7. That's not just weekdays and go home. We want residents here. We want entertainment and restaurants. And the parking guys, as well as the downtown planning consultants, responded to that with us, and we are well on the way in terms of mixing that. We had a goal of 900 new residents. We're probably at least 200 along that route. We have conversations going for at least 350 or 400 more of those. We'll need to house the people that live in those residential units. One of the things Desmond talked to us about was that there's this symbiotic relationship between the visitor parkers who generally need, are going to come during the day, and the residents who need nights and weekends. They had coached us to oversell garages, and we started doing that right away, but there's we need to keep that in mind, that we're not only building back the businesses, but filling in the residents that we wanted. This just fits with all of those pieces. Personally, I think we need to keep that whole system of garages. When we talked with Desmond, when they came in 2017, and we're talking about repairs at this point, if what we need to do is be able to control the flex and where the monthly rentals are and where the day users are based on how downtown is growing and maturing, it gives us control over that as well as control over the rates. I mean, we may have to make some tough decisions here about it, but at least we know we can deliver on the plans that we've made. So I want to thank the staff again for the great work on this and support this, figuring it out, the specifics from what we have in front of us to get going. Thank you.
Councilman Dobler?
Thank you, Mayor. We did some sort of request for information. I'm looking at the city manager recently. Seems like there was a couple of companies that responded and were interested in just taking over the whole system. I think we would continue to own the garages, but they would take over the maintenance, financing, repair, all that kind of stuff.
Yes, sir. On the request that we put out, we had responses from all the way from some companies that wanted to manage, own / or manage the systems. That is something that I think there's a lot of potential there. It'd be something I think we would like to research and provide information back to the mayor and the governing body on that, if that's a potential avenue that the governing body would like to look at.
If I could, Mayor, I think more of a statement than a question, I guess, at this point in time. We've got to do something. We've neglected parking garages for 20 years, and we've got to figure it out. And clearly, Jason and Hannah did exactly what I wanted to see. What does it cost us to, can we fix all the garages and run the parking system without outside dollars? And the answer is clearly no. So we're either going to have to come up with general fund money to fund the repair of the garages, and then it looks like we can limp along at that point with the self-sustaining fund. But if there's any other options at this point, we should look at them. It doesn't mean we're gonna do that, but we ought to know. And so if there are firms out there that would come in and take over the entire parking system, if that's even legal, if it makes sense from a public works side, let's at least explore that. And if that's not feasible, then, I mean, it appears that the infusion, I like the term infusion because it kind of connotates something on life support here, and that's kind of where we're at. So probably the direction we're going to have to go. Thank you, Mayor.
Further comment or questions? Following up on Councilman Dobler's comments, I do believe that we had some kind of conversation, if not brief, about a third-party entity taking over and managing the facilities in the system. So I agree that not leaving anything unlooked at, I think we should entertain some of those opportunities just to make sure that we haven't gotten a rush to do something and maybe not looked at a possibility that still is there before us and we just haven't given it the time. So I would ask if the city manager has that information, if he can compile a report that would give us at least a start to where you think those private entities are coming from and what the opportunities are.
Yeah, I'll get with staff and we can definitely pursue that.
Okay. Anything further before we move on? Okay, thank you for the reports, Hannah and Mr. Tryon. I really appreciate it. Very detailed. A lot of information. Braxton, you as well, thank you for filling in as well. We'll move on now to. Oh. Have we got one on here? Okay.
Yep.
Oh, we do. Okay. We do have public comment. Sorry for that. First one I have here is Mr. Joseph Ledbetter.
Thank you, everybody. Can you hear me? Is the sound? Okay. As I've said frequently over the past several years, at all budgets, I've recommended that we sell off several of our fee simple owned garages. These are the ones that have the most maintenance. These are the ones that, when I look at the numbers from tonight, we're talking about borrowing a huge amount of money, and this table on page 7 doesn't even include the Uptowner, if that's part of this. And it looks like it would take 30 years to pay back $27 million, and we're talking about revenue bonds. And one of the things I'd love to see is every month for the council to be aware of just exactly what we borrowed, because the last number I recall was we're already at over quarter billion on just revenue bonds. So as rates go up, and that's something I didn't hear, these bonds will get more and more expensive. Yes, there's inflation. We're all aware of that. There's especially inflation in construction. If you cut off those costs of having to do these massive amounts of repairs on several of these parking garages, and I'm not saying which ones necessarily, you don't have to sell all 4 of those, but it'd be a good number. But one of the things that I heard tonight was, well, if we reduce the system, then we have to raise the cost on the people that are still here. And I'm going, why don't you cut the cost of staff, of utilities, of maintenance, management? You always contract when you get rid of assets in the private sector. So what I mean by that is the cost of the system should be going down overall. One of the things that I might recommend tonight is you might think about bifurcating this situation, this problem solving, and deal with your on-street parking, which seems to be a separate issue. And if those rates are being paid on Kansas Avenue, wouldn't that drive people to start using the garages a little more? Wouldn't that be a proper assumption? And I don't know how much it costs to put those meters up, because you don't have that cost tonight. It wasn't provided. But it seems like a fairly simple fix to raise revenue just on your street parking, and then maybe even think about how to cut expenses with personnel in that area. I heard this oops ticket. It kind of got my attention. $35,000 is a lot of money, folks. You don't just throw that away. So if you're trying to raise revenue, well, of course you would get rid of that. I mean, I've never been to a city where they give them, but anyway, the simple things like that, those ideas should not just be dismissed. That's part of your overall fix of raising revenue. So I'm going to run out of time, unfortunately, here. But back to, there's some assumptions that were made in this, I want to say it right, Desmond study in 2017. Well, that was pre-COVID. And they were assuming we'd have this full downtown, and all these people would come back. I know a lot of people are working from home still. And so I know this is affecting the parking garage vacancies and occupancies, as well as your street parking. I know it affects the bus service. We haven't gotten back all of our customers from pre-COVID. I'm going to go out on a limb here and ask for an extension.
How much time would you like, Mr. Mayor?
2 minutes, please.
Have a motion to approve 2 minutes extension by Mr. Emerson. Second? Second by Councilwoman Ortiz. If you'll call the roll, please.
Councilmembers Ortiz, oh, I'm sorry, Emerson is next.
Yes.
Kell,
Yes.
Dobler,
Yes.
Duncan,
Yes.
Lesser,
Yes.
Mayor Padilla,
Yes.
Councilmembers Hiller,
Yes.
Valdivia Akla,
I'm having a hard time barely hearing that, yes.
and Ortiz. Yes. We have 9 yes, motion carries.
Okay. 2 minutes.
Thank you. So, when I go back to this first, the PowerPoint that was handed out at the special meeting, on page 4, I find it interesting, I was listening to this conversation about we're projecting these revenues are going up, and yet you've got pre-COVID, and then you've got less revenue in 2021 on a number of these parking garages, and then the projection in 2022 is that it's going up. But that's a projection. We're not done with 2022 yet. I think, you know, you've got to pay attention to those numbers. Let's just pull one of them, Coronado, 149,000 pre-COVID, and 2021 was 113,000. So some of these assets are underperforming anyway, and then you're going to have to put, according to the talk here tonight, a minimum of 15 million just in the ones you've got, while you actually have, you know, an additional one, the Uptowner, for another 4.5 million is projected. And I will tell you, I think the private sector can beat these numbers, but with inflation, I'm not going to try to put a number on that today. It does cost more for government to do these things. But a break even is 37 years, or we could demo it for 2.5 million. And we just demoed the White Lakes Mall. Demolition costs have gone up. So I would rather see us move to start selling off some of the older ones and that are going to cost more to repair. I do represent a developer that's very interested in some of those garages, and then you know, repairing them. You'll probably do that under the TIF that we've got, make those repairs that way. Once these properties are out of the city's hand, they do go back on the tax rolls at whatever that rate is, whatever is paid on. So there are some other things that weren't discussed tonight that you might want to consider, but I guess I would deal with that on-street parking really rapidly. It seems like a simple one. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Next, we have Mr. Greg Braden.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the City Council. Appreciate your service and the opportunity to be here this evening. I represent the ownership group for the reserve portion of the City Center parking garage facility. And as such, we have a vested interest in seeing how that particular facility is operated, as well as all of the others in town. And I appreciate the opportunity to learn more about the challenges of working with a limited resources, if not scarce resources, perhaps. That might be a better way of saying it. I'd be remiss if I didn't very quickly say thank you very much to the efforts of Hannah and Jason and Mike Ogden in their work. And also want to say thank you very much to Barbara, who is our the person that we see most frequently at our facility, and she is a delight to work with. I would be open to any of the options that have been discussed this evening, and particularly any kinds of public-private partnership opportunities, which is much the same as how the City Center parking facility itself was actually developed. Some of you may or may not remember the efforts that took place about 20-some years ago to develop that. And again, I thank you very much for the opportunity, and appreciate your work. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, now we can move on to agenda item 5B, if the clerk would read.
B is discussion regarding the summary of recommendations from the Police and Community Special Committee.
Mr. City Manager.
Mayor, governing body, this is to receive summary of recommendations from the committee that met for some time. At this time, I'll turn it over to the chair of that committee, Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you, City Manager. We have met for some time. I think that was nicely stated. In your packet, we began October 5th, 2020, and our last meeting was June 29th of 2022. In your packet is a list of meetings that we had and all the things that were discussed. And so we went through all of those presentations, discussions, public input, et cetera, et cetera. After that, I asked the other two chair, Mayor Padilla, he was a council member at the time, and Councilwoman Hiller to bring their presentations back after we reviewed everything. We didn't take anything for granted. Anything that was sent to us, we looked at, we questioned. We had to sift through a lot of stuff that was not true. But this committee was tasked with doing their due diligence and making sure that they were satisfied. So this committee was formed at the direction of Mayor Michelle Delisa after 4.5 hours of testimonies from the citizens in the wake of brutality against Black individuals, in particular the murder of George Floyd. So this committee was formed, and I was voted the chair of this. This has been a tedious and a long task, but like I said, we took it with heart. We've got a lot of hours in, we've studied a lot, and we've turned over a lot of things. So just because these were the recommendations, and just because there's something on here that we didn't recommend, I believe that the committee felt that there was no need to change anything in that. But what I did was take the 3 recommendations and then we turned them all over. And so this is the recommendations from the Police and Community Relations Committee. If you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer your questions. I did send this afternoon, I apologize, some questions and answers that Councilwoman Hiller brought to the committee on June the 29th, and she wanted those questions answered. So we did submit that to you. And that's where we're at. We're ready to review these and discuss them today. And then hopefully next week we can approve these recommendations. The other two committee members would like to add anything, I'd be happy to hear that. If not, I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilwoman Hiller, did you have those questions? I know that you submitted separate from the report. Everything answered?
Thank you for asking. I did. I had turned in a list of supplemental questions at the last meeting. We were fine tuning and finishing the recommendation set, but there had been enough questions about some things may or may not have been resolved, but we had questions that were coming in from the public. And so I submitted a set of questions and asked to have those answers so they were available to the public and to us. And that's what Chair Ortiz was referencing today. And I think that it must have been between the police department and her putting our history in that I didn't count. There are about 15 questions maybe, and it's just great. It's what I wanted for all of us to have.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the governing body has seen this report. Are there any questions right now from the chair about the report or the contents? Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala.
Thank you, Mayor. I got this email, I think this is the one that Councilwoman Hiller and Councilwoman Ortiz are talking about, the one that has answers to questions that we got about half an hour before the meeting. And you're saying, Councilwoman Hiller, that this came in from you and concerned citizens, public input? Is that correct?
Once the drafts, the final drafts began to come out from the committee, I don't know if the whole council got some things, but the committee certainly got requests and concerns from citizens about some comments about things that were there in the recommendations, but some that were asking questions that were outside. For instance, what's the status of the IPA, the independent police auditor? The committee's recommendations include what to do about a citizen review board, but don't address that IPA position. So that set of frequently asked questions ask for current status on the independent police auditor, things like that. We can
Okay,
go through
so
it, but
then that's what these 3 pages are that we received shortly before the meeting, and I know that it was sent to the governing body. Has this been sent out to the folks, whoever gave these questions to you?
they came from the chair, and there probably wasn't time that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I would ask Councilwoman Ortiz that question then. My apologies.
That's all right.
Councilwoman Ortiz, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I sent those to the governing body late, and I'm gonna have Liz post them so they can be posted as well. I failed to do that. She left right when I came in, and so I will take the blunt for that, because I was trying to get them to you guys after getting them from different departments. But that will be made public, because we want them to know that their concerns are heard, and answer any questions that they have.
Okay, thank you. I do have some more questions, Mayor. It's specifically, before receiving this, I had questions because I did review a number of the minutes from, not all of the minutes. There was a lot of meetings for sure, but I did have specific questions about the dealing with, or not dealing with, perhaps the IPA status. And I see definitely that some of the questions are answered on here, that he is on a contractual basis, but there's still further clarity that I need on this. And so this is one part of the questioning I have. One is Ed Collazo still the IPA? And I don't know if anybody can answer that. Okay. And I see that he's on a contractual basis. What does that mean? Is that by year? Is that by case?
I will leave that to the city manager. Contractual basis is an agreement that was set up with the previous city manager, and it's a continual contract until we fill that position on a permanent basis, which is the intent.
Okay, thank you. How much is he paid a year?
That I would have to see. I'll have to check. I do not know that.
If I could get some kind of verification on that, I would appreciate it. Also, I went on and looked, usually as a council, as a governing body, we receive quarterly reports. When Mr. Collazo was still here in Topeka, I looked through all of my emails, and I do admit sometimes I delete before instead of saving. I could not find since 2020, the end of 2020, any IPA reports that are sent to us as a governing body and then passed on to put onto the website. So I then went on, because I know that, the work had been towards transparency. I went onto the website and looked, and I showed that the last report was put on for the media in August of 2020. So my questions to that are, why have there been no cases that have come up? And am I wrong in thinking that nothing has come up since we haven't been getting anything since August of 2020? And when we can get those, or if no complaints have been coming in for almost 2 years now?
City Manager?
Yeah, he has completed those reports on a monthly basis, and I'll have to check. There may be it may be one of those things we had miscommunication on our end as to who was posting those and where they need to go. We can get all those. They have been done. I know they've been provided to the Human Relations Commission on a monthly basis. So we do have those. And so if they're not posted, that's going to be an error. I'll take responsibility for that, and I'll make sure that gets corrected.
Okay, but thank you for that, City Manager, but I want to make sure I heard that right. Did we get them as a council since then, and I just screwed up? I could have.
No, that's what I'm saying. That's, ball was probably dropped in my office. And so I was under the assumption somebody was providing those to you, and they may have been under the assumption that I was providing them to you. So no, you've not missed anything. That's totally on us, and we can get you all those.
Okay, thank you for that, because it was Mr. Collazo that would send them, and I think sometimes former city manager Trout would send them, but I think it may have been a combination of both during that time. And I did see in the records or in the notes of the meeting, the minutes of your all's last meeting or one of the meetings, how information or complaints could be put into the chief, since the IPA wasn't physically here anymore, and if someone didn't want to do an online, entry. And I guess I just have a real problem with that and concern with that, because the whole thing is that we are trying for separation. We're trying for transparency, and we're trying to work in a way that will allow the people's voice to be heard. And I don't think, no offense to Chief, because him and I have worked very well together on any number of issues, that would be anything that we would encourage in lieu of having an IPA person that you can actually get hold of and communicate with.
Yes, ma'am. He's in the office every 3 weeks for 2 to 3 days. And then also he has a phone, and the desk phone is also forwarded to his cell phone. So people can get in contact with him at any given time.
Okay, I think something like that would be beneficial to put on the website so people can know that. That would just be this one person's, council person's suggestion. Mayor, I have a couple more questions on the Civilian Review Board, if you would allow, please.
Yes, I just want to answer something for you that you were talking about, and I think City Manager touched on it. I mentioned in that report that the chief was always available. The reason I brought that up was I think there was some misunderstanding about Mr. Collazo's availability. It's not like he's not here. I mean, he travels between both places and still is in communication on a regular basis, so it's not like he's unavailable. But the alternative was if somebody was really frustrated or had no opportunity to make contact for some reason or other, that there's always that opportunity to take it to the chief. As you say, with transparency, we want to make sure that everyone knows every available course of being able to file a complaint or bring something to the chief's attention. So it wasn't as a preferred way to go. It was just an alternative in case there was some frustration in communicating with Mr. Collazo. And go ahead with your other question.
Okay, in response to that, Mayor, I would just say thank you for that clarification. I know that I think at a meeting in the past, we may have been informed as a council, but we as a council are not the ones that are putting in the complaints. It's the public that is, and for the public to not have an idea of what's going on with our IPA. And I didn't know, when I wasn't seeing the reports, I didn't even know if he was still working for us, which is why I asked specifically. So I thank you for that. When it comes to the civilian review boards and looking at the recommendations, that instead of having some kind of independent citizens review board, pushing all of this over for more oversight into the Civil Service Commission, I think it's called. I watched that one as well. I just want to say a couple of things. Is that one, the level or lack of training that they have, or I think it was Human Resources Director Jackie Russell stated their training was basically no training, and the training was that they reviewed the code. If you look at the Independent Citizens Review Board ordinance that happened in 2020, which I'm going to be very direct in saying, while my name may be on that as running the ordinance and it never seen the light of day, it was the people that did the writing of that. It was the people. So I just want to be clear on that. And that is the people's ordinance. So, with that, if folks go back and look to 2020, they're going to see any number of trainings that will be required for anyone that participates on an independent citizens review board to go through. And as opposed to it falling under a city board, which is handled by people like us, putting people's names forward, or like the mayor and putting people's names forward, what this is the Independent Citizens Review Board would be done by the people. And I think that we have to have enough trust, if we want to consider a difference between the two, enough trust that if we want the law enforcement to get the trust of the people, then law enforcement also has to trust in the people and that ability to work together, which I believe it'll be separate, it'll be independent, rather than having this Civil Service Commission up. The only other thing I wanted to say about that is that the requirements are that you have some type of experience where you discipline employees, where you know about the hiring of employees, et cetera. This is not a service center. This is not corporate America. This is law enforcement officers that have the capacity to wield great power and to kill, to maim, to do the right thing so many times, but sometimes not always the right thing. And so to equate it at that low level is deeply troubling to me. So with that said, I cannot imagine all the work that you guys went through, and this is all I'm going to say today about it, because I believe that we need to slow this down a bit before going to a vote next week. And I would say that the reason I'm saying that is, one, because I continue to hear how little community input there really was for public comment, but also because what has just happened in our community, where there was a mentally ill Black man that was killed by TPD, I think it was on the 24th. And I'm just going to say, I have deep concerns as to why, and I'm basing this all on the media that I have seen and on phone calls I have received, is that there was no crisis intervention team that was called. And I would ask, why not? And the media reported one officer used less than lethal munitions while the others shot the victim multiple times because they feared for their lives. What was the difference? One used less than lethal munitions, the other shot him multiple times. And I would say, why? I would ask why. He was cutting himself with a knife, which to me screams of a mental health cry for help. And I've also received phone calls from folks that state this man was a veteran. He served in the Marine Corps. He served 2 tours of duty. He was a father to a teenage son. So now that we are at this point of a tragic death and crucial input still needed by community on the police committee recommendations, and knowing that the committee's scope was to look at race, policing, and equity, I believe it's in the community's best interest, far more than any of us that are sitting here, to slow the train down. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. A few things, some of these are in no particular order, but I did also share the concern of Councilmember Valdivia Alcala in terms of not having received the report. I do know it's been sent to the HRC, but I will say I did look, we got one up until December of last year, because I save them all and review them all, so this year when there was transitions, but again, yeah, if we could get those, that'd be great. I'll defend our committees a little bit. We have a Human Relations Commission, we have a Civil Service group, and we have a committee that meets with the chief on a regular basis. Yes, they are selected by us, if you will, but they all step up, they all volunteer, they are not paid for the most part. They are a pretty diverse group of people, and I guarantee you when they have concerns or problems, they have no problem coming and speaking to us and telling us, and in fact, we task them, especially the HRC as it relates to the auditor's report. If you see something you don't like, get over here as quick as you can and talk to us about it. So I understand that they don't have the independence in some sense that people want, but they are citizens of this community who take that seriously, and I think they deserve accolades for stepping up and volunteering for those positions. And in fact, we have problems finding volunteers for those positions. So I would encourage some of the folks who are looking to that to step up and do that. I also remember a year ago, the city manager put forth a plan to use some CARES Act money, which I supported. We got crickets on expanding our CIT unit so that it would have a 24-hour service and additional people. Part of the recommendations here include looking at that again or some form of that, and I would continue to support that because the police department does need that. And we need to continue, as these recommendations say, to improve those efforts. What we have here, what I'm concerned about moving forward with these recommendations is we have what's in it and we have what's not in it. And what I worry about is that we forget what's in this and lose sight of 2 years of work and many good recommendations that do improve civilian oversight and input into training and use of force issues and many other areas. And we forget that because we focus on what's not in it. I'm okay with having conversations about what's not in it. And if council members have proposals to bring forward from the public, great. Let's bring them and let's discuss them and let's have those conversations. But I don't want those to also then overshadow what is a lot of good work in this. And if we dive deeper into it over the next 6 months to a year, if we adopt some of these recommendations, can do a lot of good work for the department, provide assistance to our officers, and continue to give the public some more assurances for the work they do. So that's kind of what I'll balance as we move forward, making sure we don't lose sight of what is years of hard work, while also making sure we are listening to what's not in it and trying to balance that as we move there. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilman Kell.
I think if we hold off too long, and there's been 23 meetings, I think I counted, that have been held on this, we're not moving forward. Does not mean we can't keep this going and have our recommendations now and then have more recommendations for the future as things change. But to kind of sit there after 23 meetings, 2 years, to kind of say, pump the brakes, let's take our time on this, we're not really fixing anything as a problem that's out there. So I believe that this should be just maybe a quarterly or biannually meeting that could happen, that we can kind of adopt more practices as they arise, and we're not holding off on an issue that people feel is a very important issue that needs to be taken care of as quickly as possible by postponing it another 6 months, year, 2 years.
Councilwoman Hiller, did you have comment as part of the committee?
Since you asked, I was just scratching my ear, but anyway.
Okay.
I did suggest at our last meeting that maybe it would be good, once this is passed, hopefully soon, but whenever the body is ready, to set a 6-month and a 12-month review. Many of these suggestions are suggestions that need to move forward, but they're not so specific that they could happen a week later or something like that. And just to make sure that as a body, we've all taken a look at what efforts have been made and what changes have been made on the recommendations that come through. I think there was a little reticence after 23 months of that very same 3-person committee being who got tasked with that 6 and 12-month review. But as we move forward to next week, you might want to consider that for those very reasons. I don't know if it would be the body of a whole, or it seemed like the same special committee all 3 of us will be on council in 6 months and in a year, but if there's a reason to make a change, something to think about.
Thank you. Well, there's still plenty of time for discussion. That's what this is today.
Absolutely.
There's still some time for discussion. So people who have ideas, thoughts, suggestions, recommendations, suggestions that I encourage you to use your council members. I'm not leaving yet. I'm just trying to get something in, Councilwoman, okay? Thank you. I would encourage you to use your council members as that voice for you so that they can bring those concerns to the body when we have these discussions. There is a finality to it. We do have to come to a point where we either accept them or we don't accept them. That's just life. The next day, tomorrow, something will change and somebody will say, oh, but wait, but that will continue on and on and on. So we have to put a very good faith effort into looking at these recommendations, believing in them, and as Councilwoman Valdivia Aka likes to say, trust that we have been able and worked hard to do these in an environment of trying to improve wherever we can our services to the citizens of Topeka. This is important. That trust is a two-way road. It has to go both ways. So I'm asking that people think about that and give it due consideration. I thank Councilwoman Ortiz for having stepped forward and being the chair. It was not an easy task. Councilwoman Hiller, I appreciate your attention to detail and continued concern for what may or may not have been included. So that's important. So I just wanted to have an opportunity to say that I appreciated the opportunity to participate in the committee, even though that it never was my intent. There was an offer made to another council person, and they declined, and so I took that role. Initially, I stepped away from it because I didn't want it to look like I was just bringing the policeman's view to the committee's work. But in retrospect, I think it helped us a lot at looking at detail and looking at realistic situations and not situations that we just have a conjecture about. So I appreciate the indulgence that my fellow committee members gave me in serving on that committee and allowing me to speak when they did. So, Councilwoman Valdivia Aka.
Thank you, Mayor. Not sure at all, but just wanting to ask, or just wanting to put out there that I was approached after the hearings by Councilman Emerson if I would like to be on this policing committee. And I said no. And if anybody wants to know why I said no, it was because maybe I'm a little bit cynical, okay? So I just want to make that really, really clear to all the folks, to media, whoever. I was asked and I said no, because what I was afraid of is that if there were other members that didn't agree with me, because I know sometimes I run to a different drum, that I would be voted down, that things would ultimately not end up changing with the people that I was talking to and that we all have talked to at some level. And so I just want to be real clear. If folks want to know who that person, one of the people was that said no, it was me. And I'm definitely open to having any discussions and feedback. You can call me 785-233-7110, and I'm sure I can give you an earful. Thank you.
Thank you for that self-identification. I don't think anybody on the committee ever named anyone, but I appreciate that. Councilman Lesser, we do, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of things. I too would like to thank the committee for all their hard work. This was a difficult task, probably a task that from the onset we're not going to make everybody happy. So I appreciate the courage of Councilwoman Ortiz leading it, and the other committee members being a part of it, and everyone who participated. You know, the definition of integrity is doing the right thing, even when you know it's going to cost you. And everybody who was on that committee certainly had to know that they weren't going to make everybody happy, and still continued to do what they felt was the best work they could do. And there will not be a perfect outcome in any committee we set up. You know, that being said, you know, I feel I do have to respond to a couple of the comments. You know, that basically were related to the train station shooting, and you know, I think relying on the media for information that we do receive, I truly believe the media divides us. On one aspect, we get to hear all about, you know, an unfortunate shooting that happened in Ohio, but we don't hear 3 days earlier or a few days earlier, you know, 3 officers getting ambushed and killed, because that's just not as good of a story for the media. In regards to deadly force being used down here, you know, I don't know all the facts. I'm waiting for them all to come out. I would assume that it was used after the first attempt of non-lethal beanbags did not work, and the man continued on towards the officers. I do, having a daughter who had mental illness who died of that. I do feel for clearly a man who had mental issues. I also do know for a fact that he was a veteran. I also do know that there is investigation being on that he would try to get help at the VA center and they didn't have enough beds. So maybe part of the blame needs to be looked over there, as well as we have all these ARPA funds that I've been a huge proponent of saying I expect a lot to this bucket to go to mental health. But we also can't forget the victims, the other victims, which are the police officers whose lives are also changed, who now have to live with the fact that they took somebody else's life who I'm certain they didn't go to work that day hoping that was something they were going to have to do. So there's a lot of victims here in situations like this. And I think taking the time to do the due diligence of figuring out exactly what happened is the responsible thing to do. I'm sorry for the unfortunate situation to this gentleman's family. as well as the officers that were put in the position they had to make that decision. That's all I have, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We have, I want to make sure I don't miss anyone, okay? We have people signed up for public comment on this particular item. First person I have, Ms. Sandra Lassiter.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Council. Thank you, Sandra Lassiter, 42 Engage. Thank you for the opportunity on tonight. I do want to commend our Councilwoman Sylvia Ortiz and our Councilwoman Karen Hiller, and I appreciate the fact that they heard our voices. And I do want to give you a disclaimer, so to speak, that we're not a bunch of radical, irrational persons who just want to complain. We like to compliment you. Thank you, Mrs. Alcala, as well, for what you shared. As I was able to peruse some of this information in the document, I do have a major concern that I think needs to be highlighted moving forward, or whether you want to kind of slow the train. The word train right now is not the good word to use, I guess, but the IPA. And Ms. Alcala, you've asked some of the questions that I wanted to ask, and that's about the person being on site. Is the person accessible? Is the person able to communicate in person? And I realize we're doing a lot of Zoom and all of that. And even the fact that it was online, I looked at the form online, and being an educator, I'm always concerned about the persons who are non-readers, the persons who are illiterate, the persons who may have to seek other help that cannot afford an attorney or afford assistance in filling out a document. And given this information I've seen about the IPA person, this person is not on site in Topeka, Kansas. He's in another state, don't know what that is. A former police officer, I understand, I could be wrong. And please correct me on anything that I have wrong. I want to be right and not wrong. But I do have a concern that he supposedly provided oversight of all use of force cases. And I don't know whether those results came through just the manager's office or the city council, but if it's online or somewhere we can read it, that's good too. But I certainly would like a person-to-person or a group to meet with this gentleman and find out some other questions. Are you part-time? Are you full-time? Are you no-time in Topeka? What kind of money are you receiving? And then when the complaints are filed, what order or process do they go through in order for the public to receive it? I can pretty much wrap that up because I'm real concerned about the IPA position. I don't want it. That's not what I'm asking, but I am very concerned about persons being available to the community. Another person I think will be addressing chokeholds. I have a statement that I've coined, and that is just because you have the right doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. And as we are seeing mass shootings throughout the nation with the NR-15 and the ammunition and all of that going on, there are people, yes, mental illness and so forth, but some of this is just craziness, demonic activity, and we cannot say it's all okay. I realize when you do the crime, you should do the time, from the top to the bottom, no matter who you are. I can agree with that. But the fact that some things that we might overlook or say, well, we'll discuss that later, it needs to come up for a review. It needs to come up in the evaluation. It needs to come up in a quarterly or a 6-month review or whatever. We love our Topeka, Kansas, and I believe persons should be here that are getting paid for working with our community, and that's what I have to present tonight. Thank you very much. Mr. Braxton went out. I was going to do a comment at the end. I talked to him again about our 12th Street project, which I did not agree with, and many citizens didn't, but they're at least cleaning it up, and we'll be able to get through part of it. Now, I'll leave it to the McVicker to Gage folks to file their complaint, because it's summer. When are we going to do it? Summer, fall, or winter? I'm through. Bye.
Thank you, ma'am. Next person I have is Ms. Danielle Twemlow.
Good evening. Thank you for having me, Danielle Twemlow. I've spent a lot of time in my career doing FEMA training, disaster management, writing emergency operation plans, and lots of work on mitigation and, doing evacuation plans for schools and for community organizations. And one thing that's always really important is making sure that we look at mitigation, right? Like we think about what possibly could happen and develop the plans and put them in place to minimize the risk to the community, right? This isn't about the police chief being terrible or police officers being terrible people. Putting some of these things like a citizens review board in place is a way to keep those checks and balances, a way to prevent disasters from happening within our community by keeping that eye on, by watching for patterns and policies and procedures that may be problematic. And while we do have these split in different little regions, it sounds like there's no formulation to it, no real standard. And I do appreciate the work. We as a community, I spent 3 minutes reading out everyone's their credentials at this last meeting, the PhDs and the masters and all of the education that went into formulating the plan that the community brought forth in 2020. It was not just a radical whim. It was taking things from different police forces and different communities all across our state, right? I mean, we're sending our police recruits to Royals games in Wamego, so it would go to say that looking at other communities for how they do things would also be really relevant. And we did that, and we spent months doing that research. And in the end, a very detailed plan was presented with steps, with ideas, with cross-checks, and all of the things pulling forth from other organizations that have tried this, other cities that are doing it, and it's working for years. And this ordinance was brought forth, it was made up, it was reviewed, it was kind of accepted as a general standard that other places have been using well. So instead of looking at just from a mitigation point of view, right, just looking at some basic guidelines versus having a very detailed, well thought out plan that has been working in other communities for a very long time, right? Some of the communities in Kansas City, they might not call them a citizens review board. They have different names. We don't have to be hung up on what the name is. Salina recently just had one. We even have our Kansas judicial system has them for children. I mean, they can be formulated and work in a very reasonable way within governments and still be independent. So my hope is while this work that was done is well appreciated, to also trust that the community spent effort and time. This wasn't just random. And we, again, can provide all that documentation of the data, the stats, the other cities that actually use these types of formats. But I don't want us just to throw this away because this other work has happened. But it can definitely be something that we use to make sure that we're being structured in our work. Over and over again in this document, it says the community can come forth, the community can do this. Well, let's give a structured, organized, thought out plan for the community instead of an unjust burden of constantly watching and having to speak up. So I urge you to look at this again, and I'll be emailing it back out.
Thank you. The next person we have is Pastor Carl Frazier. Good evening, Pastor.
Good evening. How you all doing? God bless each one of you. It's good to be here. I thank the committee. I thank each one of you that's doing the great work for this city. And I think the relationship I have with the chief and the past chief and all the things and police reform. But today I come to you as the chair and the executive director of the Center for Peace and Justice. As we looked at the police reform, we worked diligently and submitted some recommendations that we felt like would be very good for our community. And I think we have come a long ways, but I remember when I was my little kids and we were taking trips to wherever we were going, Disney World, whatever, was just Arkansas, South Carolina, whatever we were going. And they always get in the back seat and ask, are we there yet? And the question is, I don't think we're there yet. I think it's good. But we look at the recommendations, and we look at the community that I come from, the Black community, and people calling me from the African American community and other communities, they are very afraid of things that's going on. Although I have a relationship, but yet they are still afraid of what's going on. Number one, we still haven't did an ordinance, city ordinance on no chokehold. Have not done it yet. It's not even the recommendation. That's the reason George Floyd got so popular, because of this. Why can't we do it in the city of Topeka? It doesn't make sense. I mean, matter of fact, we know that it's in the procedure, but we get another chief that is no matter what, he can change that. But it needs to be with the city ordinance that said that there are no chokehold. When our people get stopped by a police officer, it's different when other people get stopped by a police officer. I train my son, I train my children, when they make sure they have their license, insurance right here in place, just in case, so they won't be reaching for nothing. When we reach, we get shot. And so therefore, it's important. I went to a trip on Orlando, Florida, with a white lady for social justice ministry. And I was in the car with her, and she put her purse in the back seat. I said, wow, we can't put our purse in the back seat. You know, I'm just some of the things that, this is the purpose of the no chokehold. This is the purpose of some of the things that go on in our community. Number two is that these recommendations, as a past auditor for many years, as a past auditor, I never had recommendations without time frames. 6 months, a year, it's negotiable with the person you audit with. I mean, you got to have time frames. If you don't have time frames, I mean, I trust these things to get done, but I never did a review or turn my audit report without some estimated 6 months, 1 year, whatever, in time frames. Then the next thing is that this does not deal with the recruitment of that we're dealing with, especially with African Americans, Hispanics. Matter of fact, all the promotions been done. It's been with most of white males. It have not been African American male in a person in management since Tony Kirk. I don't know. So can I have 3 more minutes?
3 more minutes, is there a motion, a motion for 3 more minutes by Councilman Kell, seconded by Councilman Dobler. Call the vote, please.
Councilmember Kell?
Yes.
Dobler?
Yes.
Duncan?
Yes.
Lester?
Yes.
Mayor Padilla?
Yes.
Councilmembers Hiller?
Yes.
Valdivia Aquila?
Yes.
Ortiz?
Yes.
And Emerson?
Yes.
We have 9 yes, motion carries.
3 more minutes.
So we have not had anyone in management since Tony Kirk, I think, to represent our community. The last promotions, I'm friends with a lot of people. I'm a chaplain. I love my officer. I love chaplain. But I'm reaching for my community. When they see that on the news that all these people getting promoted and none of them look like us, it's a concern there. It's a concern. And some of the recommendations we said we were going to start. We talked about recruiting from the historical Black colleges, but that haven't done it because no time frame. So what I'm saying is that the problem is that it's history. The history is that when slavery was happening, it was okay until someone noticed it was wrong. When you look at history, it was okay that women did not have a right to vote until someone did something about it. It was okay that with history we looked at the Civil Rights Movement, the Voters' Rights Act, all those things had to do something because someone stepped up and saw something was wrong. When I see that, when I look at wherever I go, if there's not people like me and the boards, people like me and other places, I'm looking at, there's something wrong. So I'm asking you all today to look at the things in these recommendations, not as a whole, but look at it as what is right for our city. I don't think some of these things are right. And I love Topeka. I moved to Topeka 06. I've been blessed since I've been here. But I think it's a city that we can come together and look at some of the things that our community have. I'm getting calls. It's nothing but white people on the promotions. Nothing but white people on this. Not the last recruitment class. And African Americans are not included in a lot. I think this coming. I heard a couple more on this coming class. But what I'm saying is, we got to have. We're going to deal with things in our community. These recommendations got to go a little bit further. And when you look at the mainstream voices from the Center for Peace and Justice, those recommendations, go back and look at those. It's dealing with recruitment, dealing with mental health, it's dealing with all the things that we need to have to make our city better. That when my son come here, he won't be afraid, or my grandson start driving, they won't be afraid. So what I'm saying is, we still got some people afraid of our city. And until we look at those chokeholds, look at mental health, look at all the recruitment, and put in time frames, I think we will be in a better place. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor. Okay, that covers discussion and public comment on on agenda item 5B. We'll move on to public comment. We have several people signed up. Ms. Lassiter, you're signed up for public comment?
I already said it. Thank Mr. Braxton for fixing 12th Street.
Okay. Good job, Braxton. We have Mr. Patrick Delap. I see you back there, Pat.
Hey, what's being passed around right now is pictures of an incident that happened with me with Code. Code and I are friends. I'm vice president of Genesee Town NIA, and you've all received letters of it. I did turn an inspector in for trespassing on my property. He was 80 feet off any place he had the right to be. Well, apparently a grudge is being held. I turned this property here that we're looking at. It's next to one property I own. It's private property. We had a homeless encampment move in, a trailer, things like this. So I turned it into Code, see, click, fix. They took an awful long time to respond, 10 days. Now, just happened the day that they responded, I was in the Capitol building at a committee hearing on a bill the city was interested in. I did not give oral testimony. I did not give written testimony. The city attorney was up there, so was Ms. Tiller. Okay? I was seen up there. An hour after I was seen there, guess what? You can see it in yellow highlighted right there. City inspector could find no violation of city code. You see that picture? Do you guys agree with that? This upsets me. You know, yesterday was the 4th of July. Declaring our independence from England because England was mistreating us left and right. Now here, am I being mistreated? Am I being punished for showing up at a committee hearing? What would happen if I spoke to that committee hearing or wrote? Or is something going to be kicked back to me today for talking to this committee right now? I did show this to the county appraiser, and then things started to roll. I wanted an $18,000 reduction in my property value. And I showed him the picture, someone code said, well, I have to look into this. Actually, it was the assistant county appraiser. But they did. They gave me a $10,000 reduction, not an 18 that I wanted. Then all of a sudden, things started to change a little bit. It got cleaned up a little bit. Code would occasionally come over and talk to them, and whether they were coaching them or not, things like this. Now, this is, worst case scenario, this is a tactical response. They're my enemy, the homeless population there, and they know it. I told them when they were stealing electricity from my tenants that I'm going to cut that cord. It didn't go well, but no, we didn't have any violence. Things it's just words. So they're my enemy. Is code using tactical response of the enemy of my enemy is my friend? This shouldn't be happening. Right now, there are 2 additional tents there and the trailer. We have passed codes previously saying that you have to have written permission from the owner. Why isn't that being enforced? We also have the thing that you can only stay there a certain number of days, and with that trailer, you've got to have a hard surface underneath it if it stays there more than 6 months. We're approaching that time limit, even though it was there before I turned it in. But we're approaching that time limit, gentlemen. Please, get this thing cleaned up. I don't want to be treated that way, or you should not be treating any citizen this way because you're upset of something else they did to one of their employees. This is not the type of government we need to have. Please, let's get professionals down there. Let's get this taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Jim Parrish. Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, City Manager, members of the council. My name's Jim Parrish. Can you hear okay? 700 Southwest Jackson Street, Suite 200, Topeka, Kansas. I was intended to sign up to talk under the parking agenda item, but I made a mistake and got in the wrong slot, so bear with me. I'll only take a second. I do want to share with you the letter that I prepared and delivered to the city, the acting city manager regarding the Uptowner Garage. We have occupied and worked with that garage for 40, 50 years, almost all of his life. That's been a part of the Jayhawk Tower complex. More recently, when it was in disrepair, I was approached by the city, in the acting city manager at the time, and asked me if I would take over the management and operation of that garage and invest in its repair. Since that time, I've invested $1 million in that garage in management and repairs, and it was I who called for the Bartlett West study that was first prepared, because I could see that regardless of how many full-depth repairs or how many attempts to correct things, it was getting ahead of me. There's been an implication that we haven't taken care of that garage and we haven't done our job, but to the contrary, we have. Even as recently as a couple of months ago, we repaired the plumbing that had frozen up and deteriorated. We repaired the furnace. It's just so much, and it's getting ahead of us. We need an orderly transition out. We have 314 cars parked in that garage. It's to capacity. It's necessary for the health, welfare, and occupancy of the Jayhawk Tower complex, which involve the historic Elks Club building, the Jayhawk Tower, and the Commonwealth building. We can relocate. We can take our limited resources to other areas, but we would like time to transition. And if there is going to be a renovation of the garage, we want to come back and remain customers of that garage and contribute to its continued success. I'd like you to read the letter and call on me anytime if you have questions. Allow me to call on you to make my case so we can have time for an orderly transition if one needs to be made. I know that your time is valuable, and I won't spend any more of it unless there are questions that you'd like me to answer on that subject.
Typically, Mr. Parrish, we don't have question and answers exchanged during public comment, but thank you for
Okay.
appearing
Well,
here this evening.
And thank you very much for this time and opportunity.
Thank you. Okay, we move on now to announcements. If the clerk,
Jeff, you got one more, Mr. Ledbetter?
oh, I didn't see Joe. I mean, on the list. Go ahead, Joe. I tell you, these are not working very well at all. Come on up, Joe.
I was hiding in plain sight.
Yep. It's your hair gave you away.
So, governing body, thank you for your time, and I do want to thank you for that earlier extension. I won't need one on this. One of the things I wanted to emphasize, and I've occasionally after months of watching or, listening, I'll think of, couldn't we do something better in a certain area? And I'll propose ideas. I've proposed some reforms to the charter ordinance about more involvement with the council over the oversight of managers and contracts and how many dollars should be signed. I've talked about a lot of reforms. I've talked about the council should be much more involved in the creation of the agenda. Not that they should create it, that's the manager's job, but I have talked about these things over the months and years. So one of the things that I would like to propose tonight is, I think most of you know this, I am on the Topeka Metropolitan Transit Authority, and I've been on that for about 2.5 years, and we've gone through some pretty interesting times with that authority, and we've had to really respond, not just react, but actually respond and solve problems very quick as we were confronted with those problems. A lot of those suggestions came from the board, including yours truly, but I did not come up with all of them. But what I'd like to tell you is on that board, every month I get a monthly report. Now, we don't have a lot of what I would call debt. We have different budgets like depreciation and things like that. And we discuss any construction projects or any purchases at the actual board meetings. But one of the things that comes up in the report is we know what our income is that month. We know what our outlay is. We have a percentage of what amount of the budget we've actually used to date. And we hit the target pretty well last year in spite of the increases of gas prices. And we did have to raise it this year because it's an extra $500,000. There's just no way to cover that. But the thing I'd like to request is I think we could do a one-page sheet, just a summary showing what our debts are every month. What type of debt that is, revenue bonds, GO bonds, temp notes. Whatever that debt is, I'd like it to be identified. Because I will tell you now, not everybody's aware of this, but last year I really had to pry. I think I finally filed some CORAs, but to get actual answers, we did have different people in finance at that time, but to get answers about our debts. I couldn't get straight answers about how much revenue bonds we had, and when I shared it with the councils, I always shared my information with all of you, or try to, at least try to get it out, because I know you all talk to each other, so somebody's going to see it if I give it to somebody, and I tell you, hey, you need to know this. It's interesting to me that so much money has to be asked about. It should be right there for you every month. Now, this is just my opinion, but I think the size of the MTA budget is $10.5 million a year compared to $340+ million here. And I feel like in some areas on that board, I have more information than you do on this board. I really do. So I'm not criticizing anybody here. I'm simply throwing out ideas as to how we might solve a potential problem. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Joe. Checking my list twice. You are the last person for public comment. And we'll move on now to announcements. Madam Clerk.
For the July 12th agenda, we have 2 appointments. We have 1 presentation for the Impact Avenues program. We have an expenditure ordinance on the consent agenda, and the action items include a public hearing and resolution of intent for the IRBs for the Flywheel Fairlawn property. We have the ordinance for the Fairlawn Acres development. It's a planned unit development at 605 Southwest Fairlawn Road. We have a resolution for notice of intent to exceed R&R for Topeka Metro Transit Authority. We also have a resolution for the notice of intent to exceed R&R for the city of Topeka. We have a resolution amending the 20 to 23, 2032 CIP and 2023-25 CIB. That's coming out of the Public Infrastructure Committee. We also have another resolution for the 2023 citywide half-cent sales tax projects, which is also coming out of the Public Infrastructure Committee. And then we have the Police and Community Special Committee Summary of Recommendations.
Thank you. Mr. City Manager?
Just like to mention that the proposed budget is live on our city website. Just a reminder of that. And that's all I have.
Mr. Emerson?
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I wish Mr. Ledbetter was still in here, but in the budget, I noticed going through there that the staff took the time, they actually now provide us with the debt, the general obligation debt per capita. They also have the revenue bonds, debt per capita, so it's a neat chart, and I really appreciate all the work that staff. I've not made my way entirely through the budget book, but it's fantastic so far. I mean, the format and everything. I don't agree with all the spending, but we'll get to that in due time. Secondly, there was kind of there was almost an allegation or insinuation that a couple members of our staff tonight contacted code enforcement because of someone's testimony in front of the legislature. And I'm trying to think of a word I can use on public here. And I don't know if I can say bullshit, but that's bullshit. Our legal and our city manager have the utmost integrity, and that's total. So I kind of resent that was made. Anyway, that's it.
Thank you. Councilman Kell.
Wow, I'm not sure how to follow that one up, but July is Independent Retailer Month, so in essence, your small businesses. People start small businesses to chase a dream, fill a void, innovate, help others. Every big business was a small business at one point. And my wife and I have really, in the last couple of years, tried to make a point to go to the small businesses and spend our money. And with Topeka, there's plenty of groups out there that they do almost little drives to push business there to our small business here in Topeka. And so just always make sure you're checking out what businesses we have, because lots of times you hear, oh, this place is closing. Oh, I wish I would have gone there, or I never knew it was there. So just kind of educate yourself on the small businesses we have in town and what they can do to help you, because a lot of times they can help you out a lot better. And a good example is there's a t-shirt company, Go Blue, here in town. I can have a quick turnaround on almost anything. If I go to a large company, maybe 2-3 weeks before I see results, and I don't have the back and forth like I do with the owner here in town. And he does great work with all the schools here in town. So supporting a small business helps out the business owner, but it helps out so many others by allowing that business to stay open, such as, in this case, Go Blue helping out the schools and giving back to the schools. So make sure you research all the small businesses, or if you see something new, make sure you make a mental note and go back and check it out. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mm-hmm. Councilman Dobler.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just wanted to point out, you mentioned that, or somebody mentioned that we have the proposed 23 budget in front of us. Obviously, we'll spend a lot of time talking about that over the next couple of months, but based on, I think, comments from the city council, the budget that is presented has a 1 mil decrease due to the 8.5% increase in property valuations. That's everything combined, so that includes a lot of residential properties that went up 11, 12%, as well as commercial and industrial. Guess that means there's no raises for the city council this year, but we certainly appreciate, I think, the effort put in by staff. Again, we'll have a lot of discussion, but what a great start. I think just the just the realization that we can't just continue to see these kind of increases for lots of folks on fixed incomes, lots of folks trying to figure out how to pay those property taxes that went up on a house when their Social Security and other forms of income didn't go up at all. It's a great place to start, so I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Mayor.
Deputy Mayor Duncan.
Thank you, Mayor. Two things. I also will thank staff for putting together a budget with a mill levy decrease, but more importantly, found a way, hopefully we can stand pat on increasing non-union salaries, and as Councilmember Dobler said, not increasing elected officials' salaries, so giving it to the folks that matter the most. The big one is ARPA. The deadline's July 31st. I want to remind everyone out there. So far, staff has done a really great job of answering questions that come in and getting those posted so everyone else can see the answers to those questions. If you're wondering, we have 2 completed applications. We have 8 that are in process, and I am confident based on some phone calls I got that a lot of people were gathering their info and waiting till the holiday ended before they start filling those out. So, but I do want to remind everyone that July 31st is the deadline. So if you've got any questions or concerns or comments or problems, reach out to us, either staff or myself. And like I said, so far I believe we've been pretty receptive to getting answers. So thank you, Mayor.
Mm-hmm. Councilman Lesser. Is he frozen?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You hear me?
Yep.
Yes?
Yep. Hmm? Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Just real quick, who would have thought? I thought it would be me that would drop the bomb on TV, but it was Emerson, so probably won some money there. But I did want to point out and say, I think in regards to that topic and some of those accusations that were made there, I think, the Change the Culture committee that Karen and Councilwoman Davey and Hannah are on that have done a great job in working with Karen Black. So I think we're moving in the right direction on all those things. It was a good meeting with her when I did get to have that breakfast, and so I think we are moving towards solving some of those issues. I will tell the gentleman something that a gentleman named Wally Meckler told me one time was, "You're not Mike. You're not that important." I can assure you that nobody, none of our staff cared that he was testifying was up there, and I take exception with that attack on their credibility as well. So for what it's worth, thank you.
Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to just dial back to this past weekend and give a shout out to all the neighborhoods who did so much in coming together and had parades and fireworks and family events and so on. I personally went down to Highcrest and sat in with Scent. There were probably 2,000 people there tremendous family event covering lots of space and some of the best fireworks I've ever seen in my life, right up close and personal. I mean, safely in the field next to people, but it's just fun to see all those sorts of things coming alive all over the city and people working together to celebrate who they are and what we have. And so just wanted to share that and what's coming up on deck. Music Week starts Friday. I think it's our first one, but or else I wasn't paying attention. Fiesta comes up the week after that. Country Stampede is coming up. It's a busy place here, and it's pretty exciting. So that's it for my report today. Thanks for all the support on the other things that are going on. It's a busy time for us too.
Thank you. Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala.
Just letting folks know that we continue to work really, really hard on changing our culture of property maintenance. Some people get really passionate and, you know, hard comments to take. And, you know, city staff, I mean, I will say they've been working with us at all levels on this change in our culture of property maintenance. And our goal is just for everyone to lean in more, whether that's city staff or neighborhoods. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Just as final comments on my part, I agree with Councilwoman Hiller. I had an opportunity to also go out there to High Crest. Oh, Sylvia, I tell you, this has not been a good day for me. Councilwoman Ortiz, my apologies.
Get you an eye appointment scheduled up.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't going to argue with your final remarks. I wasn't going to argue there, but I do have a couple of things. First of all, if you guys will remind Antonio, there is no cussing in District 3's chair. There's no cussing allowed. Next, hope everybody remembers the Fiesta. We cut our days a couple of days, but there will still be a Fiesta. So come out and enjoy us getting back started on that. And last but not least, I want to welcome everybody to the Gibbs Elite Basketball Camp. And that will be starting on Monday and it'll end on Thursday. So everybody's welcome to come and see what we're doing with, I think it's 117 kids, but everybody's welcome. Thank you.
Again, I think I'm just going to cut my losses here because the way I'm going.
It was really nice.
I just want to remind everybody of one thing, and that is the deadline to register to vote, July 12th. I think it's extremely important for people to pay attention to this deadline. Things have changed, and if you want your voice to be counted, it gets counted at the voting booth. So make sure you take the time to register to vote and vote in the upcoming primaries. Thank you, and that's all I have. So now I will ask the city attorney to read the need for a second executive session.
The motion would be to recess into executive session not to exceed 15 minutes to discuss matters related to an individual employee pursuant to KSA 7543-19B1. The open meeting will resume in the city council chambers. The following staff may be needed to assist the governing body in its deliberations: interim city manager Cochran and other staff he deems necessary.
Okay, we've heard the need for an executive session. I have a motion.
So moved.
I have a motion to approve by Councilman Kell, second by Councilwoman Ortiz. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we will recess into executive session for 15 minutes after a short 10-minute break. Okay, we're back into open session. We did not take any action during our executive session. If there's no further business to come before the body, I declare this meeting closed.